tonight, but we are going to spend a good part of this next hour remembering and celebrating the remarkable life of Dolly Parton.
Hour zero was met with worldwide silence as flags dropped to half-staff across Nashville. By hour 12, the glowing tributes poured in from world leaders and country royalty alike. But when hour 26 struck, an unexpected lockbox arrived under armed escort at a secluded probate court in Sevier County, Tennessee. By hour 43, the smiling, rhinestone-clad icon the world thought it knew for 6 decades completely vanished into the shadows of a stunning reality. Behind the wigs, the larger-than-life laughter, and the spotless saintly image was a carefully orchestrated alternate existence, one that was never supposed to see the light of day. The clock started ticking the moment the world found out. Hour 1, Hour 2, Hour 3. Across every major news network, every social media timeline, and every radio station from Nashville to New York, the same devastating headline broke like a thunderclap over the country music capital of the world. Dolly Parton was gone. The woman whose voice had carried generations through heartbreak, poverty, and unimaginable triumph had taken her final bow. And for the first few hours, the world responded exactly the way you would expect. Candles flickered on the steps of the Grand Ole Opry. Fans gathered outside Dollywood in the cold Tennessee rain, clutching handwritten signs and singing Jolene through tears. Politicians issued polished statements. Fellow artists posted tearful selfies. The entire planet mourned a woman who had spent 60 years making sure she was loved by absolutely everyone. But while the cameras captured the grief, something else was happening behind closed doors that nobody was talking about. By hour 7, a convoy of 3 black SUVs pulled up to a nondescript brick building on the corner of 4th Avenue and Church Street in downtown Nashville. No press, no photographers, no public announcement. The building housed one of the most exclusive private depositories in the entire state of Tennessee, a facility so discreet that most Nashvillians walked past it every single day without ever realizing what was stored behind its reinforced steel doors. Out of those SUVs stepped a team of 4 estate attorneys, 2 forensic accountants, and a woman identified only by the initials MR, who reportedly served as Dolly's most trusted personal confidant for over 30 years. They moved fast, they moved quietly, and they carried a single manila envelope stamped with a designation that sent chills through everyone in the room the moment it was read aloud. Protocol 1966. Now, if you are a casual Dolly fan, that phrase probably means absolutely nothing to you. But if you have ever worked inside the upper echelons of the Nashville music industry, Protocol 1966 is the kind of phrase that makes your stomach drop. It refers to a contingency clause that Dolly Parton quietly embedded into her original estate planning documents back in the mid-70s, shortly after her career exploded into the stratosphere. The clause was designed to activate automatically within the first 12 hours of her confirmed death, and its sole purpose was to trigger the immediate retrieval of a specific set of sealed documents that had been locked away for nearly half a century. Documents that even her closest family members did not know existed. Documents that her longtime business partners had never been allowed to read. Documents that, according to the strict legal language of the clause itself, were to be retrieved before any public probate proceedings could even begin. By hour 19, the first safe deposit box was cracked open under the watchful eyes of a Tennessee probate judge who had been quietly summoned from his home in the middle of the night. What the legal team found inside that box did not just raise eyebrows. It shattered the entire foundation of the Dolly Parton story that the world had believed for decades. Buried beneath layers of notarized paperwork, handwritten letters, and faded Polaroid photographs was a complete alternate legal identity. A second social security record, a second birth certificate with a different middle name, a second set of property deeds tied to a woman whose name had never once appeared in any public record, any tabloid story, or any authorized biography. According to the timestamps on the documents, this ghost identity had been active since 1974, the exact same year Dolly made her controversial crossover from pure country into mainstream pop music. And the most disturbing detail of all? The alternate identity was linked to a sprawling, unregistered estate deep in the backwoods of rural Georgia, a property that had been quietly maintained and staffed for decades without a single neighbor ever knowing who actually owned it. So the question that immediately consumed every person in that room was not who this second identity belonged to. The fingerprints, the signatures, and the biometric records all confirmed the same undeniable truth. The question was why? Why would the most beloved woman in American entertainment go to such extraordinary lengths to create a completely separate life that no one was ever supposed to discover? And more importantly, what was waiting for them at that hidden Georgia estate that was so dangerous, so deeply personal, that Dolly had spent 50 years making sure it stayed buried? The answer, as the legal team would soon discover, was hiding behind the one relationship the entire world thought it understood better than any other. The name Carl Dean has always occupied a strange, almost mythical space in the Dolly Parton legend. For 57 years, the story went like this. A young Dolly, fresh off the bus from the Smoky Mountains, walked into a laundromat in Nashville in 1964 and locked eyes with a quiet, unassuming asphalt contractor who would become the love of her life. They married in a tiny ceremony in Ringgold, Georgia, just 2 years later. Carl never wanted the spotlight. He never walked a red carpet. He never gave interviews. And Dolly always told the world that his fierce privacy was the very thing that kept their marriage alive through decades of unimaginable fame. It was the perfect country love story. Simple, humble, unbreakable. But the documents pulled from that Nashville depository during the 43-hour window tell a radically different version of events. Starting around hour 22, as forensic accountants began cross-referencing Dolly's private financial records with decades of travel manifests and security logs, a pattern emerged that was impossible to ignore. According to the newly unsealed files, Carl Dean and Dolly Parton had not shared a primary residence for the majority of the last 3 decades. The quaint Nashville home that tabloids occasionally photographed from a distance? Carl lived there full-time, yes. But Dolly's actual day-to-day life was centered around a completely separate, heavily fortified compound tucked deep into the Appalachian foothills of eastern Tennessee, a property that did not appear on any public tax record and was registered entirely under the ghost identity discovered in that first safe deposit box. The security logs were particularly staggering. They documented a rotating team of 12 private guards, biometric entry systems, and a strict no-visitor policy that applied even to several of Dolly's own siblings. And the financial records revealed something even more shocking. A detailed contractual arrangement between Dolly and Carl that had been renegotiated every 5 years since 1981. This was not a prenuptial agreement. This was not a standard celebrity marriage contract. According to sources close to the estate, the document outlined specific obligations, appearance schedules, and financial distributions that functioned less like a romantic partnership and more like a carefully managed business arrangement designed to preserve a public image that both parties had agreed was worth billions of dollars. Now, before you rush to judgment, it is critical to understand the context. Dolly Parton built her empire during an era when a divorced female country artist was essentially blacklisted by the Nashville establishment. The optics of a stable, lifelong marriage were not just personally meaningful. They were commercially essential. And Carl Dean, by all accounts, played his role flawlessly. He showed up when he needed to show up. He smiled for the rare photograph. He maintained the illusion of domestic bliss that fans around the world desperately wanted to believe in. But behind those closed doors, the reality was far more complicated, far more lonely, and far more calculated than any authorized biography ever dared to suggest. And then came the discovery that turned the entire investigation on its head. Buried within the security logs of that hidden mountain compound was a recurring name. A name that appeared on visitor access records spanning nearly 30 years, logged with a consistency that suggested a deeply personal and long-term relationship. A name that was not Carl Dean, not a family member, not a business associate, and not anyone who had ever been publicly connected to Dolly Parton in any capacity whatsoever. According to the compound's entry logs, this mystery individual had unrestricted access to the property, private living quarters on the second floor, and direct communication lines to Dolly's personal cell phone. And the most unsettling detail? The access records showed that this person was physically present at the compound on the exact same nights that Dolly was publicly reported to be performing sold-out concerts hundreds of miles away. So who was living in Dolly Parton's secret mountain home while she was on stage under the lights? And what does this hidden figure have to do with the locked chest buried beneath the Dreammore Resort at Dollywood? that Dolly swore could never be opened until 2045. The answer was hiding underground, and it was about to blow the lid off everything. If you have ever visited Dollywood, you know the Dreammore Resort. It is a sprawling, storybook property nestled right at the edge of the Great Smoky Mountains, dripping with rustic charm, fairy lights, and the kind of warm southern hospitality that makes you feel like Dolly herself is greeting you at the front door. In 2015, during the resort's grand opening, Dolly made a theatrical gesture that captured headlines around the world. She placed a single master tape inside an ornate chestnutwood chest, locked it with a golden padlock, and declared to a crowd of reporters that the recording inside could not, under any circumstances, be opened until the year 2045. She laughed her famous laugh, winked at the cameras, and told everyone it was just a little gift for the future. The media ate it up. Fans speculated endlessly. And then, like most celebrity stunts, the story slowly faded from public memory. But 43 hours after Dolly's death, the Dreammore chest was no longer a cute publicity moment. It was a crime scene. Around hour 28, estate attorneys arrived at the resort with an emergency court order demanding a full inventory of all Dolly-owned assets on the Dollywood property. What they discovered beneath the resort's main building was not a single locked chest. It was an entire underground archive. A climate-controlled vault spanning roughly 1,200 square feet, buried beneath layers of reinforced concrete, and accessible only through a hidden freight elevator that most Dollywood employees did not even know existed. Inside that vault were dozens of reel-to-reel master tapes, encrypted digital hard drives, leather-bound journals filled with Dolly's unmistakable handwriting, and a wall of filing cabinets containing sealed legal correspondence dating back to the early 1980s. The master tapes were the most explosive find. According to audio engineers who were quietly brought in to assess the collection, these were not unreleased songs, demo recordings, or scrapped album tracks. They were raw, unfiltered voice confessions. Hours upon hours of Dolly speaking directly into a microphone, often late at night, often in tears, detailing the darkest corners of the entertainment industry and the personal sacrifices she had made to survive inside it. She named names. She described deals. She recounted moments of exploitation, coercion, and betrayal that she had swallowed in silence for decades because speaking out would have destroyed the carefully constructed image that kept her empire afloat. One tape in particular sent shockwaves through the legal team. It was labeled simply Track 0, and it was stored in a separate fireproof case at the very back of the vault, wrapped in a handwritten note that read, "Destroy immediately upon my death. Do not let anyone hear this. Not Carl. Not the family. Not the lawyers. Burn it." The note was signed and dated 1997, a year that coincided with one of the most mysterious gaps in Dolly's public career timeline, a period when she abruptly canceled an entire tour with almost no explanation and disappeared from public view for nearly 4 months. The estate attorneys faced an impossible dilemma. Dolly's final written directive was crystal clear. The tape was to be destroyed. But the probate court had already issued a preservation order, meaning every item in the vault was now legally classified as evidence in an active estate proceeding. Destroying it would be a felony. Playing it could expose secrets that powerful people in Nashville had spent decades trying to bury. And ignoring it was no longer an option, because word of the vault's existence had already begun leaking to the press. By hour 34, a compromise was reached. The tape would be cataloged, sealed under a judicial gag order, and stored in a secure evidence facility until the estate proceedings concluded. But not before one senior attorney reportedly listened to the first 90 seconds of the recording to verify its contents for the court inventory. According to sources who were in the room, that attorney's face went completely white. He immediately stopped the playback, locked the case, and refused to discuss what he had heard with anyone, including his own legal partners. So what was on those first 90 seconds that terrified a seasoned Nashville attorney into total silence? And how does it connect to the millions of dollars that forensic accountants were simultaneously discovering had been funneled through Dolly's charitable foundations into a shadow network that had nothing to do with children's literacy? The philanthropy the world adored was about to reveal its hidden purpose. If you ask anyone on the street to name a single celebrity they believe is truly, unquestionably good, 9 times out of 10 the answer is Dolly Parton. And for good reason. Her imagination library has mailed over 200 million free books to children worldwide. When wildfires tore through the Great Smoky Mountains in 2016, she handed out monthly checks directly to affected families from her own pocket. When the pandemic brought the world to a standstill, her $1 million donation helped fund the Moderna vaccine. In a culture full of scandals, controversies, and disgraced heroes, Dolly was the one untouchable saint. The one figure everyone agreed was pure light. But as the 43-hour countdown crossed into its 35th hour, forensic accountants working in that Nashville depository realized that Dolly's legendary generosity was only the visible tip of an enormous, carefully concealed iceberg. Beneath the celebrated nonprofits lay an intricate web of 11 anonymous shell companies, 7 private family trusts, and offshore routing accounts headquartered everywhere from Delaware to the Cayman Islands. At first glance, the accountants feared the worst, the standard story of a wealthy celebrity hiding millions from the taxman. But as they traced the outflow of those funds over a 40-year period, the truth turned out to be far more extraordinary and far more dangerous. Tens of millions of dollars were not being hoarded. They were being deployed. The records revealed that starting in the early 1980s, Dolly established what can only be described as a private, underground protection network operating directly beneath the glittering surface of Music Row. For decades, the Nashville music industry had been notorious for its predatory culture. Young, naive singers arriving on buses with big dreams, only to find themselves coerced, exploited, and trapped in abusive management contracts by powerful men who operated with total impunity. Dolly knew that world intimately because she had lived through its brutal beginnings herself. Instead of fighting it through public statements that the country establishment would easily squash, she fought it in the shadows. The unsealed ledgers documented millions of dollars funneled into anonymous legal defense funds that quietly bought out predatory contracts for dozens of young female artists without their abusers ever knowing who supplied the money. There were covert payments covering long-term psychiatric care, emergency medical bills, and safe relocation housing for industry victims who had been blacklisted or threatened into silence. If a young songwriter was backed into a corner by a predatory label boss, an anonymous legal trust would suddenly step in, pay off the debt, and provide airtight non-disclosure agreements backed by unlimited legal resources. And then there was the retaliatory file. Among the encrypted accounting files was a detailed dossier documenting the systematic financial destruction of a once untouchable Nashville executive, whose name had reigned over Music Row throughout the 1980s and 90s. In 1994, after a young backup singer suffered severe abuse at the hands of this executive and was subsequently fired, an anonymous entity began buying up the executive's distressed publishing catalogs, acquiring his bank debts through secondary markets, and quietly pressuring corporate sponsors to pull their funding. Within 3 years, without a single shot fired in the press or a single public allegation made, the executive was completely bankrupt, stripped of his catalog rights, and forced out of the music industry forever. The signature approving the final wire transfer that purchased his ruined catalog was signed in that same familiar looping cursive. Dolly Rebecca Parton. She wasn't just a singer. She wasn't just a philanthropist. She was an undercover syndicate leader who had weaponized her immense wealth to quietly balance the scales of justice in a town that had tried to break her when she was 19 years old. But as the estate team pieced together this astonishing financial operation, a glaring, impossible contradiction stared back at them from the timeline. Many of these covert meetings, safe-house drop-offs, and critical financial interventions occurred in person, in cities thousands of miles away from Nashville, on the very same dates that Dolly was supposedly appearing on national television, walking red carpets, or greeting thousands of tourists at Dollywood. How could the most recognizable face on planet Earth slip into the shadows, travel completely undetected, and run an underground empire without a single camera catching her? The answer lay in an elaborate disguise protocol that went far beyond wigs and makeup, and a series of sealed surveillance tapes from a 5-star hotel in Zurich that nobody was ever supposed to see. Think about the image of Dolly Parton for just a second. The sky-high platinum blonde wig, the dazzling rhinestones catching every spotlight, the 4-inch acrylic nails, the cinched waist, the heavy southern makeup, and those trademark long sleeves that covered her arms from her wrists to her collarbone. For 50 years, the public treated that look like an affectionate joke. Dolly herself would laugh about it on talk shows, famously quipping that it cost a lot of money to look this cheap. Fans spent decades debating whether the long sleeves were hiding secret full-sleeve tattoos, surgical scars, or skin conditions. But as the clock ticked into hour 38 of the post-mortem investigation, the estate team uncovered the real purpose behind that iconic look. It was never just a stage outfit. It was the ultimate architectural camouflage. By turning herself into a literal human cartoon, Dolly Parton created the single most effective disguise in pop culture history. If the world only recognizes you when you are wearing 20 pounds of hair, stage foundation, and 6-inch heels, what happens the moment you take the wig off, wash your face, pull on a pair of oversized sweatpants, and walk out the back door? You completely vanish into thin air. According to a series of heavily classified operational files labeled the Shadow Protocol, Dolly took this illusion to a level that felt more like international espionage than country music stardom. Beginning in the mid-1970s and expanding rapidly throughout the 1980s and 90s, her management team retained 3 professional body doubles on full-time retainers. These women were not just casual lookalikes. They were matched to Dolly's exact height, build, and posture. They were fitted with identical wigs, matching custom-made stage outfits, and silicone prosthetic neck pieces designed by top Hollywood makeup artists. When Dolly needed to appear at distant motorcades, wave from the back of a convertible at a Dollywood parade, or sit in the back of a tinted limousine outside a premiere to draw away paparazzi, the doubles took over. They were paid massive 6-figure salaries under ironclad non-disclosure agreements with million-dollar penalty clauses. While the crowd screamed at the flashing rhinestones, the real Dolly was already slipping out through a kitchen service entrance in plain clothes, driving an unregistered sedan, and disappearing into normal life. And that brings us to the Zurich surveillance footage. In November of 2002, the official Dolly Parton press machine announced that Dolly was locked away in a private Nashville studio for 3 uninterrupted weeks, laying down tracks for a new acoustic bluegrass record. Press releases were sent out, social media updates were published, and local radio stations ran daily reports about the recording sessions. Yet, internal travel manifests and European hotel security files recovered during the 43-hour countdown told a completely different story. During those exact 3 weeks, a woman checked into a private luxury penthouse at the Bauer Olac Hotel overlooking Lake Zurich in Switzerland. She traveled under the name Rebecca King, one of the aliases linked directly to that original 1974 ghost identity. The hotel's raw surveillance footage, preserved in Dolly's private archives, showed a woman with short, natural dark brown hair, zero makeup, wire-rimmed reading glasses, and simple cashmere sweaters walking unattended through the streets of Zurich, buying groceries, and sitting in public cafes reading European newspapers without a single passerby giving her a second glance. She wasn't hiding from a scandal. She was doing something far more poignant. She was escaping the crushing, suffocating weight of the empire she had built. For 3 weeks at a time, she was able to just be a human being, completely invisible to the world that demanded she never age, never hurt, and never stop smiling. But the Zurich tapes revealed something else. Something that chilled the estate executors to the bone. In the second week of that Swiss trip, the footage showed Rebecca King meeting in the hotel's private courtyard with a young woman in her early 20s. A woman whose facial structure, eyes, and bone structure bore an uncanny, undeniable resemblance to Dolly herself. They sat together for hours, speaking in hushed, emotional tones, exchanging documents and a small velvet lockbox before parting ways. Who was this young woman Dolly had crossed an ocean to meet in total secrecy? The answer was about to detonate the entire Parton family empire, unsealing a hidden bloodline and a second, secret family branch that the world was never supposed to know existed. If there was one subject that could bring tears to Dolly Parton's eyes during any interview across her 6-decade career, it was children. She spoke about it with an openness that endeared her to millions. Born into crushing Appalachian poverty, the fourth of 12 children crammed into a one-room cabin on the banks of the Little Pigeon River, Dolly had practically helped raise her younger brothers and sisters. But in the early 1980s, following a sudden medical emergency and a partial hysterectomy, she was told she would never carry children of her own. For 40 years, the narrative was settled. Dolly poured that maternal heartbreak into the world, becoming an honorary mother to millions of children through her literacy charities and fiercely supporting her dozens of nieces, nephews, and siblings. Yet as the post-mortem clock crossed into its 40th hour, estate executors looking through the sealed depository ledgers discovered a document that upended that entire narrative. Trust Fund 84B. Created in October of 1984, the trust was backed by nearly $40 million in private equity and prime real estate holdings, including a sprawling, unregistered ranch in northern New Mexico and a residential estate in the Swiss canton of Vaud. But what made the executors freeze was not the staggering dollar amount. It was the designated status of the primary beneficiary. In standard legal terms, family trusts explicitly identify relationships: brother, sister, nephew, niece. Trust 84B contained no such labels. Instead, it was structured under the umbrella of Dolly's ghost identity, Rebecca King, and named a single woman born in late 1982 as the sole heir to not only the real estate, but to Dolly's most closely guarded personal property. 40 years of private, handwritten diaries, unpublished master recordings, and a continuous stream of private royalty revenues. This was the same young woman seen on the Zurich hotel security footage. As forensic genealogists scrambled to cross-reference hospital archives and closed legal filings from late 1982, the heartbreaking and complex reality began to emerge. Following a devastating family crisis involving one of Dolly's siblings, an infant had been born into circumstances that threatened the child's safety and well-being. Rather than subjecting the baby to the vicious scrutiny of the 1980s tabloid press, a media landscape that was already relentlessly stalking Dolly's every move, Dolly made a radical, life-altering decision. She did not publicly adopt the child as Dolly Parton. She knew what that would mean. It would mean a lifetime of paparazzi lenses, security threats, kidnapping fears, and the toxic glare of the Hollywood spotlight. Instead, utilizing her legal alias and a private network of trusted attorneys, she legally arranged for the child to be raised in total anonymity, shielded behind a fortress of private trust funds, remote properties, and an airtight wall of non-disclosure agreements. Dolly was not an absentee benefactor. She was a constant, secret presence. The flight logs and Zurich hotel records were not random getaways. They were carefully scheduled maternal visits where Dolly could shed the wigs, wipe off the stage paint, and simply be a mother away from the predatory eyes of the world. By hour 41, word of Trust 84B's existence had quietly leaked to the broader Parton legal camp, triggering an immediate wave of shock and tension. For decades, Dolly's extended family had operated under the assumption that the vast music empire and its personal archives would be distributed evenly among the established bloodline. Now, they were suddenly facing the reality of a completely hidden heir who held legal claim to the most intimate artifacts of Dolly's life. Lawyers began raising urgent questions. Were there other trusts? Were there other children or family members shielded beneath different corporate veils? The vacuum of information was threatening to ignite a bitter, public war over one of the most lucrative estates in American music history. With only 2 hours remaining before the 43-hour legal window slammed shut, the chaos reached its absolute peak. But Dolly had anticipated this exact moment decades before it arrived. At precisely hour 42, an authorized courier arrived at the Tennessee State Supreme Court carrying a wax-sealed envelope and a single audio tape marked with Dolly's final handwritten instructions. The ultimate truth was about to be heard. At exactly 43 hours and 0 minutes after the world learned of her passing, the legal clock ran out. Inside a closed, high-security hearing room at the Tennessee State Supreme Court in Nashville, the final wax-sealed envelope was placed on the center table. Surrounding it were the state probate judges, the lead executors, and the very few people permitted to witness the conclusion of Protocol 1966. The room was deathly quiet. No cameras, no media leaks, just a vintage cassette player, a set of high-fidelity monitor speakers, and the physical tape pulled from the final fireproof lockbox. The executor pressed play. For the first 5 seconds, there was only the soft, ambient hiss of magnetic tape. And then, a voice filled the room. It wasn't the high-pitched, bubbly, cartoonish Southern twang that had greeted millions on morning talk shows for half a century. There was no theatrical laughter, no self-deprecating jokes about wigs, rhinestones, or hillbilly roots. The voice coming through the speakers was low, steady, slightly raspy, and strikingly resonant. It was the voice of a woman who had carried the weight of an entire world on her shoulders, speaking with an authority that left every person in that chamber completely breathless. "If you're listening to this," she began, "the curtain is finally down. The show is over. And for the very first time in my life, I don't have to play Dolly anymore." Over the next 20 minutes, the tape laid bare the monumental architecture of her 78 years on Earth. Dolly did not apologize for the secret identities, the hidden trusts, the ghost properties, or the shadow syndicate she had run beneath the nose of the Nashville music establishment. She didn't apologize for the phantom marriage arrangements or the daughter she had moved heaven and earth to shield from the media meat grinder. Instead, she explained why every single piece had been necessary. "When I was 18 years old," Dolly's voice echoed across the wood-paneled room, "a man on Music Row looked me in the eye and told me that a girl from the mountains was either a victim or a product. He said I'd never own myself. So I made a deal with God and with myself right then and there. I would build a product so big, so bright, so loud, and so impossible to ignore that they'd never be able to touch the woman hiding inside it. That was the grand reveal. The blonde wigs, the thousands of rhinestones, the caricature of the bubbly country girl. It was never just branding. It was armor. It was a multi-billion-dollar distraction designed to keep the predatory machine of the entertainment industry looking at the sparkle while the real woman in the shadows quietly took control of the board. She used the caricature to earn the money. She used the money to build the trusts. She used the trusts to protect the vulnerable, rescue the exploited, and carve out a small, sacred space in the world where she and the people she truly loved could exist without being consumed by the public's insatiable appetite for celebrity. Carl Dean was not a victim of a fake marriage. He was her co-conspirator, a trusted partner who agreed to play his part so that both of them could survive the madness with their sanity intact. When you look back now at her music, every lyric shifts on its axis. Coat of Many Colors wasn't just a nostalgic song about a rags-to-stitches childhood. It was her declaration that she knew how to weave scraps of survival into royal armor. 9 to 5 wasn't just a catchy radio hook. It was an undercover battle anthem written by a woman who was actively dismantling the executive boys club with every anonymous wire transfer she authorized. And I Will Always Love You wasn't just a farewell to a musical mentor. It was a promise to the quiet, unvarnished woman she locked away in the shadows so the world could have its queen. As the tape reached its final seconds, the low, steady voice softened. There was the sound of a deep breath, the breath of someone setting down a burden she had carried across 6 decades of glittering captivity. And then, Dolly Parton delivered the final sentence of her extraordinary life. They thought they bought a hillbilly girl they could sell to the world. But in the end, I bought the world, and I kept myself. The tape clicked off. The 43 hours were over, and the myth of Dolly Parton was finally replaced by the staggering truth of the woman who outplayed everyone. Locked inside the final safety deposit box was an unreleased cassette labeled simply, "For the World When the Show Ends." In it, Dolly's speaking voice, completely stripped of her famous country twang and high-pitched cheer, whispers a single confession that will forever rewrite the history of country music and expose the staggering secret she took to her grave. What was on that tape?